Hello and welcome to the value of everything. Now, we are going to explore a little bit of a cultural phenomenon. I guess when you approach things like culture, it's not quite as philosophical as approaching just like an item of virtue, but we have to study society structures, where you look at economics and where you look at things like politics. This is all a basis upon, these are all interconnected, weaved or woven balls which come to this world which we live in today. And today's very important structure, which I guess in some degree is very relevant, does definitely exist. It is definitely a major part of a lot of cultures, I think pretty much around the world. I think some of them probably maybe even have it more so than others. I'm going to talk a little bit probably from a perspective of the British lad culture, but I'm very sure that the Americans have it, the Aussies have it, every Western culture will have it, and I most likely predict where there's a little gathering of lads, there'll be most likely a little gathering of lads in every single little culture that you could potentially go through, from Asian to African. There is always going to be this gathering of lads, and this does bring out obviously a grouping of a certain sex together, and there will be a different manner and a different way in which these people will conduct themselves, as do, I would imagine, a grouping of ladies. So it's a very interesting dynamic. I would expect that there's a different thing that comes which plays out at this part. I guess you could say to a certain extent that it's probably important to be consistent, whoever you are, to whoever you speak to. But I do definitely think there is something interesting in the lad culture and how things can be explored in lad cultures, and maybe it is a very important part of society itself and how things get structured in the future. And maybe even, I would say to a certain extent, it is the last line of defense. When potentially even society does start to crack down, there is the lad culture which will start to put its foot down and say, no, enough is enough. Let's stand together and we will overcome these problems. And they obviously are a dynamic of morality which is always continuously going on. So with lad culture, I'm just going to give you a little bit of an observation from my perspective, because this is a very interesting lad culture which I have, or a grouping which I have. And there's a number of little things I'd like to make a little pointer on first. The first thing is that this formation of lads has been together for quite some time now. Probably there's been a few connections here and there from like where kids were about 6 years old between me and one of the lads, and there's a number of connections which occurred a little bit beyond that to high schools and all those lovely schooling environments, well, probably not so lovely schooling environments. So that's where all the connections occurred, and it's a very enlightening thing to know that all of the people in our lad group were raised by two parents, which really does, at least one thing does, give us a very strong sense of a masculine role model in ourselves. So it's not like we were raised by only a woman. We've all been surrounded by men throughout our lives, and I would say for the most part, all of the men that we were raised by were fairly dominant males, fairly sort of, when I say dominant, very sociable males. Definitely not very quiet males. So it's very interesting how there has been a natural progression on that point. Another thing is I don't think that every single male has a lad culture as a sense, and particularly not a lad culture that continues from high school all the way until they reach their mid-30s and they're having kids and things like that. It's definitely something that I have seen in my father, and and it's obviously continuing on in me to an extent. But it's very interesting how the cultural grouping of friends can stick around and remain for a ridiculous amount of time. Also, the fact that I have emigrated outside of Britain itself, I've moved to Australia, and yet I am in very close contact with all the lads, and when I return back, it's like I've never left, and everything just seems the same again. Which is an incredible marker, especially if you haven't seen somebody for a long time. Usually, sometimes you find that it takes a little bit of time of just getting used to them, getting to know them, and all that kind of stuff. There isn't really any pause for thought or anything like that, and I can just go straight in with telling ridiculous jokes straight away, and it's pretty much working the dynamics of the group instantly. So that is all there, and it's never died and it's never faded. So interesting dynamics. I don't know whether every single man in the world has got the group of lads. It is probably one of the most important things that could ever exist when it comes to a man, because it is your typical, particularly if you're not outside of the family home and you haven't got too much of a masculine contact in your life. You do have it is important to have masculine peers, so you've got a little bit of a thing going on your side. I guess there is definite detrimental aspects to the lad culture as well as very positive aspects, but I think in the whole grand scheme of things, if I was to choose not to have the lads or to have the lads, and I would pick out the virtues of having the lads and the virtues of not having the lads, I would definitely say that I would rather have the lads in, like, it's just the choice of, like, saying to me if I would rather not have my son around and stuff. Definitely, that obviously I would have my son with no questions asked whatsoever. Obviously, there's a little bit of work involved, but that definitely negates anything that ever happens in terms of having the lads or having my son. So let's just walk through a few little interesting examples. So one little observation with lad culture is that they obviously throughout time and throughout man's history is that we were pretty much isolated the majority of our time with men. Hence why we used to go to war together, and usually we would get along pretty fine. We used to go hunting with each other, and we would coordinate strategies and attacks together. So majority of our society and structural maneuverings and the way that we would ascend up the food chain and be and demonstrate our bravery and honor to other men was the way that we would get on in culture generally. And to a certain extent, obviously, a lot of male bosses do exist in this world, and hence why I think there is a little bit still of that structure that exists to this day in the workforce that certainly, this is only a theory here, that may slightly impede a woman's progression in her career. Obviously, having childbirth is a major impediment as well, but the progression through the workplace and strategy and talking to another man's man and seeing if the man is a boss as well, then there is definitely a little thing of a hierarchy and a social structure which occurs around men, which men should really be a little bit more accustomed to. Now, and also this may be a particular reason why we all are fairly, the grouping of the lads here are fairly well successful in our business lives. Okay, so that's just an observation of lad culture in itself. Obviously, we do not go around going to war, and we don't go around hunting. I guess we've played things like paintball before, but beyond that, there hasn't really been much in the way of us being real men, old-time men from the past. So, in modern society, what has occurred is that obviously time has progressed, and obviously this does happen with men, but obviously this element of the lad culture still exists to this day. Is that there will be a gathering. There'll be a certain drug that will be provided. Maybe it could be a hallucinogen. Maybe it was alcohol. Whoever knows what was happening in the tribes in the past, what drugs were being handed around. But men, and most likely women as well, were together, and they would be around the fire. But maybe there was a little bit more of like the men would talk about their day, and the women would talk about their day. There was probably still a little bit of a line drawn between two segments of the two sexes. I'm only theorizing here. Maybe there was different tribes having different structures. I know that there's different tribes which had women as the heads of the society structures. There was all different things that was occurring. I can't. All of these things are theories and a little bit more on the generalization side of things. But I can't really. I wasn't there in tribal days back in the past, but I can sort of think that it's probably kind of similar to what's going on today when there's family gatherings and things like that. So you would have a certain mix, and then maybe there was a certain cutoff as well. One interesting thing that I do remember when I was looking at the higher classes of society is that everyone thinks that the traditional way that you would sit at a very fine dining table would be to be side by side with a man and then a woman. So man, woman, man, woman, man, woman. But it wasn't actually the case of how a table was structured until probably the last 100 or 200 years. It was only until recent time. Before then, it used to be one side for the males and the other side for the females. So that's another interesting element of lad culture in itself. When I say lad culture, there is obviously a working class connotation to that, but it does. The men who go over to the green room or whatever room it was where they would smoke cigars and have scotches, there was always a gathering of men throughout any point in the class structure, regardless of what would occur. If you think of like the northern miners, they would earn their money and then they would go down the pub for the rest of it. I know that one. A story from my granddad is that he would give all his money to his wife, so because his wife could manage, or my nan, and my nan could manage the money and would give him a little bit money back because he was a chronic gambler. So it was, and maybe a bit of a drinker and smoker and everything else, but. Interesting things how the man will gravitate to a certain level of gratification in his world, and obviously this means of gratification will be through mainly alcoholism. I would say nowadays that's probably the point of the structure, and it's probably because it's legal, it's legally ready, it's culturally acceptable. All those major factors which fundamentally puts men together. Okay, so it's an interesting way. I potentially could go into one about women culture, but I really am not a woman, so I can't really quote too much, and I'll probably offend too many people. But even so, I guess with women's culture, there is. They do seem to have a much more of better communication ability than men. There is definite sort of dynamics which are going on which don't necessarily occur in men as much. Not to say that every single woman is this way inclined, but there is a certain level of, oh, look what she's got. Oh, I can't believe that. And oh my God, what she did, and all those kind of things. I'm not really too bothered about talking about what people are wearing unless it is quite amusing or something like that. I'm not sure really. Isn't it? Wow. Let me just try and pick up on a couple of bits. So criticism does occur in lad culture. It's not definitely not just isolated to women alone. However, criticism is usually directed directly to the person in front of everybody else. So there is a certain level of management which has to occur. So obviously this is all done in terms of comedy. So as long as the comedy is done to a level which it's just really, unless it's just like it's a browbeating and somebody's just feeling worse by it. But as long as the person who's being directed with what are you wearing that funny purple scarf for, as long as people are just saying that, and the other person can laugh at themselves with it, then really that's usually the management style of criticism which occurs in the lad culture. Now, the only thing that I would say potentially that does happen in terms of criticisms, it doesn't really even occur in criticisms. It probably occurs more so in the realm of concerns, is when people seem to be going a little bit too far with a little bit maybe in terms of self-gratification, or maybe going a little bit too far in terms of being a little bit immoral to the rest of everybody else. And there we potentially would have these one-on-ones with other people and just say, oh, did you see this happen? This looks a little bit out of the ordinary. We should have a bit of a conversation with him and stuff like that. And it definitely does occur, and everybody at some stage, everybody, like, this is probably one of the most important aspects of the lad culture, is that there is a certain element of where things are going a little bit immoral, things are going a little bit more self-gratification. There will be certain conversations which will happen to that other guy and go, I think we're going a little bit too far here. One of the dynamics which we had once is one was getting to the end of the round and not paying for the drink and all that kind of little things, and trying to pay back money and put it in an envelope, and then the money wasn't, one of the notes was short in the envelope, and things like that was occurring, and it was just too consistently, it was happening too many times to be unreported, so that so many words had to be guided at that person, until there was almost a state of, we are going to ostracize you until you turn yourself around. And hey presto, an old person can learn new tricks, and that person is this is ages and ages ago, but that person is incredibly turned around and has mastered the ideals of the virtue of generosity, and is definitely not displaying any way, shape or form that attribute in terms of the group. So there's incredible things that does occur. Believe it or not, one of the aspects for me is that I would like to organise the group too much, and I would like to arrange. I would think that I would have the best interest for the group and say, right, we need to stop drinking locally, and we need to go and hit the town. We need to go right up into the city of London and explore what is there on offer, instead of going into our tired little town. But though I guess it was very valid comments that I was it was being passed back to me. It was probably the manner in which I was trying to tackle that issue. I was trying to be domineering. I was trying to say, it's I've got the right idea. This is the way I want to do it. You come with me and stuff like that. And it was being revolted against. And it's definitely very valid points. And considering that I do take the the perspective now of being minarchists to the point of anarchists, depending on how the government goes. It's obviously very valid to this day, and it's an important lesson that I've learned in that respect, that nobody should really take over the power and the structure of the group. One man is more important than the other man, and it's a very important lessons on morality. So people may not even think of this in the lad culture. People may just have this constant this thing that it's just a load of men gathering around. They're being sexist, and they're just trying to like really get themselves drunk, and then that is that. But to be honest, I find a lot of my every single one of the lads in my culture, I would say, are very interesting people sober, not and very fun as well when intoxicated at the same time. So and there is always laughter that occurs at every single stage with that, and obviously one of the major things with lad culture is the ability to tell jokes, and every one of the individuals in the lad groupings that I have is incredibly funny, and one of the things that I find is incredibly useful as well is that I can crack a joke or tell a funny joke, and I very quickly work out whether it is a good joke or a incredibly shit joke, with mastering that around these people. And also, obviously, I learn things about delivery. I understand things about what I can talk about and get people interested in. A lot of these conversations which I'm having on these podcasts right now, I've sort of been doing on road trips, and it's interesting now that I'm just talking to myself driving to work, and it's actually I've had a little bit of a monologue sessions in the past, and I've been sitting there and people have said, "Yep, I totally agree with you," and things like that. And it's interesting how without that the radar or the sensors of the lad culture, I would have been going around the world that I lived in a very unsure world, and I wouldn't understand exactly what would ride well with the fellow man. And the fellow man is very important, I guess. Being very successful with the ladies is very important, but obviously you do not want to upset the lads. The one of the things that obviously can change over time is your girlfriends, but one of the things that really does stand the test of time, if you do have a close friend, is your friendships, and they will stick around, and they will almost rescue you from bad relationships. So in some ways, that has happened to me as well. I had a very long, a first-time relationship, and I had slightly closed off my friends to pretty much stick around with one single girl. And there I had the one true friend who would still try and contact me and still try and have a drink with me and say, let's have a talk and all of those things, which is an incredibly valid thing to have. In times of trouble, that somebody, when it's your darkest times or it's a troublesome time, that person will come out of the open and come to the rescue of others. Very important and brave things, and it's a good level of effort to go through to stoop to that level. And obviously, I would very much imagine so that everyone would offer the same level of help back to that person. Now, one of the interesting elements of the lad culture is that if you are obviously a lady and you do see the lad culture as a threat to your relationship, which in general it should not be, but if you do see that as a threat to your relationship, then the lad grouping will really close down on you. Particularly if you're making that person's life a little bit of a misery. So the lad culture will definitely, one of the reasons why my wife to this day is in good stead is that she had no qualms whatsoever for me to still be out with the lads and enjoy a drink and things like that. So it was very interesting how that she was accepted, whilst you would find that there will be other girls who would not be accepted. So it's very interesting in those dynamics. But as long as the lady is accepting of the lads, then and gets on with the lads, then it's a very important measure again of whether you do have a sustainable wife or girlfriend. But obviously, if the girl is manipulative and is trying to turn you against your lads, then obviously the lads will come very swiftly down upon her, and whoever's turned against the lads pretty much have always failed, I would imagine, because the strength of the lads has always been a little bit stronger than the ladies, which is incredible in that kind of sense. So you can obviously see that obviously it's very tricky to paint this with the broad brush, because I know that there's a lot of men out there that don't necessarily have this, and even if you just had accomplished one good friend, it would be an incredible feat to have, but let alone a group which is pretty much around about the group levels of 5. Now, an interesting dynamic as we talk about girls coming in and out of the relationships of the lads, there is also other men that come into the relationships of the other men, and they try and get introduced into the group. However, there has been a number of them who have tried but have not succeeded. And again, it is probably very important in those aspects that we see that there's definite people. There are people that are more so accepting of others, willing to be patient with other people, and then there is more so other people in that lad culture who is impatient with other people and definitely spots problems with that person a lot earlier than others, and will say, no, I don't think this is really working. It's like he's really just a bit of a scrounger, or he just makes everybody feel awkward, or something in those terms which would happen. I know it doesn't sound like the most moral thing to say, and sometimes, but it is a very valid thing that is occurring, and you will see some malevolence which would occur or manifest itself a little bit later, and the protectors of the group and the protectors of the dynamics of the group will remain, and say if there was any infighting, if anybody was making anybody feel low or anything like that, they would be quickly ostracized, and you would therefore find that the group would carry on in a certain way, shape, or form. But it's interesting. It's slightly complicated as well as this happens if we are regularly going out and getting intoxicated, because obviously our judgments are a lot more clouded. But very much so, the group will detect any shittiness, and one of that is probably one of the most important things within the lad culture, is that where we spot shittiness, when I say shittiness, I mean something like somebody's acting up, somebody's being a little bit manipulative, somebody's being a little bit bullying, whatever happens there is the counterbalance of the lad group, and they will swiftly come in and direct the attack back on that person. So the dominance play nobody really becomes that dominant person. Everyone tries potentially in their own way, but there is a definite whack-a-mole when anybody sticks their head up, that they get batted back down and put back into a humbling position again. And it's an important thing, and it does obviously make us incredibly humble in ourselves. Whenever somebody tries and sort of mention that I could never go around saying, look how successful I am, it would instantly just get smashed apart in a matter of seconds. But also, it does, if anybody says that there was anything like wrong about me, or somebody was having a little bit of a personal attack on that person, it would just be smashed apart in a number of seconds as well. There was a very important point I was trying to get to after this, but I've forgotten it, which is great. All right, so that's one dynamic. I have to approach the obvious one, which we haven't investigated yet. I've sort of brushed past it in terms of the latter years, but in the early years, obviously there is to a certain extent a hunting tribe which is occurring, and I would say to an extent that the hunting tribe potentially doesn't even have the dynamics of the close friends and all those things. You may just have a general coupling of lads who are really just trying to be there together just to get to the girls in some way, shape or form. So at least if you could think, okay, right, you could find in general that there's a grouping of lads which probably are not really finding each other's company very happy, but just to get out on the dance floor and things like that, and to start chatting up ladies and things like that, is potentially one of the major motives of formations of lad groups. But I would say, as a lot of lad groups have fallen by the wayside and these guys have got married and things like that, you do have the strength of the very strong lad groups which have remained and still stay in contact to this day. So yeah, there's interesting dynamics there. There's very important points as well in terms of bravery and honor, in terms of the groups. There's and these are all demonstrations of masculinity. Whenever there is threats that are made to the group, there's obviously a certain level of people trying to protect each other. There's a certain level of standing together. There's a certain level of support. So all these virtues are demonstrated in mass quantities in a lot of those ways. I definitely would, in my time, I had difficulty approaching ladies. Then I'd mastered a certain sense of bravery, and then I was explaining that to certain other lads and things like that. And we were getting to a certain extent where we was mastering things, and I would lead the front, and I would go and try and approach a group of girls, and then another person, like the wingman, would come in. So it's interesting how, I know we're not talking about pure bravery and fighting here and stuff like that, but it is quite hard things to do and overcome, and it's important lessons, and things like that have been resolved, and confident issues have been resolved in terms of being and boding well with the group of lads. So you can see that how all of these things can demonstrate a really important aspect of how a man develops. One thing I did brush over this a little bit as well is the ability of comedy is an incredible thing where you can, and I think one of the major parts of comedy as well is the honesty element. If you speak to any one of us, really we do desperately try to give an honest answer, and sometimes I would speak to the lads and they would give me a brutally honest explanation of themselves, which really almost takes me back. This is not even being comedy, but just generally talking about something. They will just be very modest and give me a very brutally honest explanation of themselves. And you'll be shocked in how they would describe it. But it would obviously, every time that brutal honesty would come out, it would bring us closer together. And this is what I mean about the sober elements. This stuff happens during sober times. That's where it becomes more valid. So with this element of honesty, then we have more of an understanding, and then we can start making more fun and more jokes in terms of the realms of honesty that we have. So I would say that out of most group of men, we have probably a very high sense of things which are funny and not, and maybe it's like a little bit of a depiction of the grouping of people that we have, but we can obviously go into, let's say, this is going to be a little bit controversial, not for everybody, is wanking jokes, whatever, like sort of things like that. And it could be, and we could find it incredibly funny for ourselves, and obviously probably not very appealing to anybody else, not probably appealing to women viewers. I'm not sure really exactly how that would get accepted, but we could do these kind of jokes, and it would all be sort of quite kind of accepted and found pretty funny, and would love the honesty that would be measured amongst ourselves in that. and it brings us always very much closer together as time progresses, and it stands the test of time. And obviously, when you meet a new friend, obviously, there's no way in hell that I can start telling these kind of jokes to that person, because it takes a lot of time and development and understanding before you could reach that sort of level. So that's why, in essence, you do return back to the group of friends, because you know that there's the heightened level of honesty and comedy which occurs between those people. Okay, so I must approach some other things. I mean, I guess it does sound like it's a whole world of pleasure, and it certainly is. But there is obviously a little issues as well. Self-gratification elements. Oh my gosh. Sometimes do go a little bit crazy at points. Alcoholism is very prevalent, and there is definitely the idea that like the amount of alcohol that can be consumed within a lad culture is pretty much getting to the point of ridiculousness. Every time that we we talk about the sessions that we have, they become longer, they become more extended, and we literally we're counting drinks of pints in the teens. It's incredible. I mean, well, maybe not all teens, but like it'll probably get to a certain level, and then we'll go on to mixers, and this will be sustained for like pretty much 12 hours. So it's an incredible amount of consumption and gratification which occurs. I wouldn't say that the best of conversations do occur at the twilights of the night, but sometimes funny things do occur. There's probably funny fallovers and things like that, but majority of it all gets forgotten about at the best of times. Interesting, ridiculous scenarios which occur, which makes funny stories and makes very good chin wags, is always incredibly important to the lads. Philosophy as well. Can't even say the word. Philosophy as well is an interesting dynamic. All of those, all the lads that I speak to, all can really go into a philosophic conversation. I know a lot of people are not necessarily interested in it. If you're listening to me, you're probably fairly interested in it. But if you talk to the general people on the street, I don't think anybody's going to look at you that straight when you talk about what is beauty. But it is, you'll sit there. It's like the sunny afternoon in a beer garden, and you can start talking about life, what is happiness, things like that, and it is an incredibly it's an incredible life experience, because you're having this closeness, this honesty, this relationship, which is beautiful, and you can really experience life. And I know that obviously Aristotle does approach what close friends are and who they are, and I think obviously the lad culture in some ways can embody the elements of happiness in people's lives. So there we have that pointer there. So where it comes to, let's go back to the alcoholism and the instant gratification side. There has been certain elements where the lad culture has gone to people and said, we're going a little bit too far here and things like that, and I'm a little bit concerned about you. Is everything going all right at home or whatever else like that? So there is definite countermeasures. But the only problem is, obviously, where we go out and where we go meet up in social areas, it does seem to be like we have to order a pint. It's not really like we start ordering Diet Cokes as we have a nice conversation. So there is an incredible amount of consumption which occurs within the group. I think, and if I speak to any of the other lads in the group, it definitely has been a very important modelling aspect of my life, and it's been a very important, I would expect it would be a very important modelling aspect to their lives as well. It's fairly interesting how throughout time, and we have a connection through our fathers, and I imagine our fathers probably had a bit of a lad culture as well before us. So this is probably a little bit of a thing which gets carried over throughout time. So yeah, we do have a continuality aspect which occurs. Now, incidentally, actually, from my perspective, one of my the close lads in London, his brother emigrated to Australia, and we remain very close friends, and he's pretty much a carbon copy, without certain little things here and there, of the lads. So I still remain to have a very close friend here in Australia. So it's very interesting in those terms how things carry over, and you do always seem to have like brothers that can quite easily adapt and move into group structures and assimilate pretty easy. Now, I'll try and scratch upon a couple of other things. Lad culture, I've gone a little bit into a mental blank there just for a second there, but let me just obviously I have to approach this one as well, because this isn't really this isn't my strong point. I have taken a few blows at this, but I do think it is a little bit of a nuisance at the best of times. Is the element of sport. Now, sport obviously is ingrained in men more so than women. If you look at participation and things like that, you can obviously see that it's men more so that are more interested in sport. And it does kick into certain drivers of hunting and fighting. So it's all that testosterone-based survival mechanisms, which does give us a certain level of appeal. So when we're sitting there and we're spectating it, it's fairly important, but it does take over the conversation quite rapidly. In some ways, like this probably sounds quite bad to and all the I know that all the lads in my group will probably start having a little poke at me and stuff like that. But I sometimes get a little bit concerned how a long conversation can occur about something so pointless as what sport is. And so much time can be consumed by this pointless topic, which really doesn't have any purpose. So, like, oh, my team's playing this team this week, and oh, it's a great matchup. I recently mentioned to somebody what a pointless level of excitement that you must have had there, and stuff like that. And then he was trying to bat me back and stuff like that. But everyone else remained silent at that point. But it was quite funny how that was occurring. But obviously, as you can see there, this is I probably measure a little bit of the counterbalance which occurs in the group. So if things go a little bit too far in one aspect, then there's the counterbalance that occurs. Maybe I stand up and I start to go, we are going too far. We're descending too much into this mindless weirdness of sport and nothing else. Let's bring it back to reality. And there is these little people that come in. I've always mentioned this before, and how certain people take different positions in terms of social structures. Now, I would say in the lad culture, I think we all take a fairly even position, because we're not allowed to go too far up and too far down in our social standings. However, I guess maybe there's certain little personal traits which will come out to go one far step as. Sorry, people crossing the road. Sorry. There's people. My train of thought just got smashed. Was I talking about this? Oh yeah, sports. Some people will go too far, and there'll be certain counterbalances which occur. Yeah, so one of the interesting points that I'd like to think of when I approach an office, usually 9 times out of 10 the office is very quiet and muted, and there isn't too many funny people. Actually, recently in an office that I've been in now, there's actually quite a funny person, so we're actually rubbing off each other really well. But if there's a complete gulf of no comedy, I will step in there and try and be the funny man. And there is definite things which occur in lad groupings where somebody has to be the reality man, somebody has to be the dreamer man. There are little things, and we can take upon different. We can wear different hats at different times. So obviously, there's sometimes people can go through very sad moments in their lives. Some people can go out and let's have a drink, let's have a conversation about it, and there is definite all those aspects. I tell you what, there is a really important element that, say, if a bad time is going on in somebody else's life in the lads group, as much as people would say, "Oh, you're going out and you're just descending into alcoholism and things like that," but that sort of let's go out for a drink, let's have a conversation. It is more so about the conversation, more so than the drugs and everything else. And I don't think you're rapidly getting totally drunk unless you're going on for a very long session. But it is a very important and valid thing just to have that conversation, that one-on-one, that quiet discussion, and that thing does happen in lad cultures, and it's an incredible thing to see a man having that hard conversation about somebody, maybe like a grief or a death and things like that, and it's important. I remember one time I sort of didn't really want to do it because it just felt so uncomfortable to me at the time, but one of the lads had to pick up one of our other mates, which he's become very close to me as well as time has gone on. His dad died, and we had to pick him up, and we had this long conversation in the car about death and things like that, and it really did sort of did just give me a little bit of an opening as well. I was trying to explain certain things of understanding what death was and things like that, and he was sitting there at the same time. Obviously, really in the grips of grief as well, but obviously that was in the car and driving. I think I always proclaim that if you've got a good group of friends, the road trip is probably one of the best things that you could ever go on, because you do have plenty of sober times driving around, and you do have that time where you could have that conversation, which you don't normally have. You always have to throw drinking into the element at the same time. But where you can have that thing and you can sit around, you can listen to music, you can share your thoughts, you can share jokes, you can share despair, you can share all of those things, and you've got somebody to share it with in all of those points of lad culture, which is really important. Now, where can I park? So, I'll park over there. Yeah, so I think I haven't even really cracked most of the parts of um, the lads as much as I really wanted to, but yeah, it's just think obviously if you've had a bad time, or if you've had a bad moment, or things have gone incredibly crappy for you, it's just that door which is always open, that place that's always going to say, okay, right, you've basically you've fucked up, but these guys are going to still be around you no matter what. So even if, like, I always think about like these politicians that get caught for something really bad and things like that. Imagine if that sort of thing occurs. If they had a group of lads, those lads would just go out with them, and they'll come to the protection of them, and they would say, right, you're all right with us, we know you. And there's that sort of element which is always very important for a man. I couldn't think of the person that I would be if I didn't have the lad culture around me. I definitely wouldn't be as funny as I think I am. I don't know. It's a matter of your opinion whether I don't really tell too many jokes on this because I've got nobody to bounce off of. But yeah, I don't think I would be as funny. I definitely don't think I would be as honest. I wouldn't be as good with other men as what I seem to be now. I think sometimes men are very they're very simple, and yet they're very complicated at the same time. There's not really too many men I can't really tap into. I know exactly how the conversations work, and I can really sort of get a man on my side in a matter of minutes. Not so that I definitely do enjoy a lady's company as well. It's just it's interesting how it's without the lads grouping, I definitely wouldn't know certain things. I wouldn't know a certain level about pushing oneself as well. There is obviously this competitor element within group of lads, and there's obviously this whack-a-mole aspect of keeping people, letting not people get too far, letting not people go too far in social dynamic groupings. And this is probably where I would try and span out to the whole world in itself. This lad culture can definitely be this pointer of people not going too far with certain things. If you go too far, the lad will stand up and he will say, I think you've gone too far there. There is comradeship, and not much of that happens nowadays. Lads can have sing-alongs. We've had play fights in fields. You couldn't imagine the amount of ridiculousness that we've occurred. We've been trying to pick each other up on shoulders and try and fight on top of the people's shoulders. Obviously, we don't really harm each other, but we just pretend to play and things like that. These are all I'm talking about grown adults here, but incredibly funny stuff that we've been doing before, and all of those memories I think are probably some of the best memories I've ever had. So there you go, all funny stuff. And in terms of this culture is one of our last lines of defences. I know that there's lots of feminists that will go against it and they think that we're all trying to degrade women and things like that, but it doesn't really happen that often. I don't think it's like we're all in there just to sort of degrade women. I know that we do obviously look at women and we go, "Oh, look, she's very hot" and things like that. But even so, and we don't look at all the aspects of her virtues. Yes, that does happen, but essentially, men are, again, as always, the last line of defence when it comes to problems in society. And I will know exactly how, when things go too out of the ordinary, I can stand up and I know that in the back of my mind, the lads will be there with me and say, "Yeah, you're right, Ross. You're totally right." So whenever I see an immoral act happening or something that is incorrect in groups and societies, I am very strong and determined in the way what I say is true, and I know that in the back of my mind, the lads are standing behind me. So, yeah, on that note, I will leave you and to contemplate about things. If you do have other dynamics which occur in your group, maybe negative things, maybe positive things, please share them. If you think I have not really given the full account, just let me know, and we can always expand on this idea. I think I can definitely. I don't think I've really covered every aspect of lad culture. I've been speaking in very personal terms, and some of it may definitely not relate to a lot of people, but I definitely would say that this grouping is probably more of the virtuous side of things, which is something that we should all be trying to achieve. And if you don't have it in your life, it should be something that you should try and strive for. At least try to get to one very close friend, because it is very important. Anyway, thank you very much for your time, and I will be back again.